Welcome to Extra Takes, hosted by Northland Church Senior Pastor Dr. Joshua Laxton. Join us each week as Pastor Josh reveals the rest of the story behind his sermons. We'll discuss how those who follow Christ can live out a biblical vision for the church in our world today.
Well, hello, Northland family and friends. Welcome to another episode of Extra Takes. I'm your co-host, PJ. Oh, okay, sorry. Didn't mean to do that. It just happened. But Matt's not here today. So
I'm here.
But well, you ain't Matt.
No.
So, and I don't think this guy needs any introduction. Because
you.
if you just speak, then, well, if he speaks, you know who he is. It's Gus.
Yes.
He has that distinct voice.
Yes.
That you just know that Gus Davies is in the house.
Thank you.
So he's filling in for Matt because Matt knew that I tend to go long, and I'm long-winded, I guess is what he's saying, and he had somewhere else he had to be later on this afternoon, so he could not be late because it was for his wife.
Yes. It's about marriage.
It's about marriage.
He doesn't want to lose his
Isn't there like a song, Love and Marriage? Love. Do you remember it?
I don't know that one.
You don't know that one?
You're going to sing it?
Well, that's all I know.
Somebody already who is listening to us, maybe continue the tune.
It was like a tune for something. Oh, I can't remember. All right, well, if you do remember, you can send us an email and let us know. Maybe it's that love and maybe it's the love. I can't remember. I won't even. I'll stop.
Don't try it.
So thanks for filling in.
Yes, I'm excited about this series. Like I was telling you, this is really elevating the biblical, the theological aspect of God's plan for marriage. And so we are glad that it's not only part of our primary doctrine, but it's really a clear biblical and theological, practical teaching we're receiving.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, theological. And that's where I've always said theology should be both biblical and practical. If theology cannot be practiced, I don't know if it's really good theology.
No, it's not. It's not.
Yeah.
So we're in week 2 of this series, How to Lose Your Family in 10 Easy Ways. I like the reverse psychology you gave us. So we're thinking about, this week you've been talking, have a changing center in marriage. And you in Matthew chapter 19, verse 3 to 9. So this is very exciting as we're going to be diving into the overview you gave us. So tell us how this connected with last week. Last week you talked about sex or purity. When I listened to the podcast, your one word, we'll get to the one word for this week in a moment, but it was purity. So this week.
Oh, so what's my one word for this week?
Yes.
Ooh, what's my one word for this week? Center would probably be my word.
Yes.
Center.
Yes.
And then you can just say, like, what's your center? Who's your center?
Jesus. You asked the congregation that before you even read the scripture, and everybody says it's Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
He is the center.
Yeah, and that's where, like, Jesus cannot just be part of your life. He has to be your entire life. And we'll dig into kind of, but that's the idea. He's the anchor.
Yes.
And the thing about the 10 easy ways, I mean, again, they're easy. Like awaken love, I mean, it's easy for people to do that. A lot of people do it.
Yes.
A majority of people at some point has done it, particularly in our culture. Mm-hmm. And then you look at, all right, have a changing center. Well, when you look at the reasons why people get married, those are changing.
Yes.
And that's why I even wanted to really specify how love, like if you say that you love each other and that's the reason why you want to get married, good for you. But just as easy as you fell in love can be as easy as you fall out of love.
Yes.
So now love can be a changing center as to the reason why you got married. So that's where when you look at even all of those examples of all of the reasons why, and there's obviously other reasons why people get married, that's not enough. Now, let me give a disclaimer, because there is a disclaimer that I always want to make sure that I give, and I don't know, and I definitely didn't give it. But we're talking about biblical truth. We're talking about the Bible. We're talking about Christian theology, okay?
Yes.
So this is what we're saying when it comes to how God views marriage and the truth of marriage according to the Bible. So am I saying that if you have a changing center that your marriage can't go the distance? I didn't say that. I said for your marriage to make it through and weather any marital adversity, that you need a massive anchor. That's what I said. So this is part of where, because I know that there are marriages that don't, that the two individuals don't know Jesus. And yet they live in some sense, a long, probably happy, satisfied or satisfying life as a married couple. I mean, so I'm not saying that you cannot make it. Yes. If you don't know Jesus. I did not say that. No, I said if you're going to weather any marital adversity, because what I would say is that any of those reasons that you give as to, again, those 7 reasons that I shared, if any of those are the 7 reasons why you got married, and then you engage a massive storm, and you go and your marriage goes through a huge season of adversity. And again, you can just name whatever that adversity is that you want. Maybe it's financial adversity. Maybe, did you know that the majority of married couples who lose a child during their marriage end up divorced? Wow. Do you know that so if you have a child that has special needs or varying exceptionalities, that your divorce rate, it skyrockets? So this is where I'm like, you just say any marital adversity, an affair, an emotional affair, like any marriage, like that's what I'm saying. Like the only way to make it through that marital adversity is having a massive anchor that does not move. That's what I said. And so yeah, there are marriages out there in the world that they'll make it, 30, 40, 50 years. And yeah, great. I'm glad for them. And maybe they don't have that many like huge marital adversities. And so they are able to make it. But if you want to make it through any marital adversity,
it has to be massive anchor to weather any marital storm. You started off by getting our attention, the principle for the week. You gave a negative principle. If you want to lose your family, choose a marital center that changes. And then the positive. If you want to keep your marriage and family intact, if we want to preserve our marriage and family, if we want to sustain our marriage and family, here is what we need. And that is this massive anchor that we have. Then you went on to give us 3 truths from the scripture that we had read. Marriage doesn't meet my needs. God does. Woo, that was shocking. That was the first one. And the second one, marriage was God's idea, not mine. God joined us together. And the third one, marriage is a mirror to mirror God. So with that, I'll come back to you with the one word for this session. This number 2. Now that you gave us what was the main point and then the 3 truths, have you been able to come up with a one word for this weekend?
Yeah, well, center.
Center.
Yeah.
So we keep it there. And once you said earlier that Jesus is the center, I think those are the truths that we're going to dig in with questions. So as Matt does this very well, he put some questions together, and earlier on we've been discussing this. So the first truth that you really revealed to us is, marriage doesn't meet my needs. God does. And the point you made, when we put the God status on our spouse, you start getting on the merry-go-round. Can you describe what you mean by the merry-go-round? When we say, this is the guy, my husband, you really explain that section. But what do you mean by the merry-go-round?
Well, I mean, the merry-go-round, I think I was talking more about the merry-go-round in the context of emotional explosions because you are not having your needs met, or you perceive that your needs are being threatened by your spouse. And so, because I had used the example of Joni and me, and how years ago I would want her to affirm me because I had this esteem need that needed to be met. So I needed her to recognize my preaching, how great I thought it was, and she wouldn't affirm. And so therefore, I feel that my need is being not fulfilled by her. And so therefore, I'm exploding emotionally to her out of frustration, and now badgering her and making her feel bad that she hasn't affirmed me. And then when I did that, I threatened her needs of safety, of personal stability, of emotional stability, of being, of being, or feeling that she was in a stable relationship, and so, and that's what happens, I think, with adults, married adults, particularly, is that if they don't know that they are now either fighting, fleeing, or freezing in towards their spouse, where they feel their spouse isn't meeting the need or threatening their need. Yeah. And then you start doing that to one another, you get on this never-ending merry-go-round of emotionally exploding. And that's and I would say, like, those are, according to the Song of Solomon, and are just using the idea of little foxes eating the vineyard. Those are the little foxes that eat the vineyard, because over time, these emotional explosions, and then again, they might not even be that huge, but they're emotionally explosive. Mm-hmm. But if you don't end the emotional explosions, then over time, those emotional explosions erode the trust, erode the intimacy, erode the connection, erode the freedom. And so now you wake up and you feel like, oh my gosh, I am not in a healthy marital relationship and none of my needs are met. And so you dissolve the marriage.
Yes.
So that's what I mean. You got to get off that merry-go-round. And the fastest way, the surest way to get off that merry-go-round is not even having any expectations of your spouse to meet your needs, because Jesus has already met your needs.
You did that, Pastor Josh. You gave us even Adam, when you gave us the list of God gave Adam all this list. God met his need. It was not Eve coming along to meet Adam's needs. So we need to be looking to God, who will meet our needs, because we cannot put the pressure on our spouse. And also, you could talk a little bit about how you use God met the needs of Adam.
Yeah.
When Adam, he met his needs. But you really took us to other things that you combine in your teaching. The basic teaching of Abraham Maslow, give us those hierarchy of needs. And tell us a little bit more about some practical ways that we cannot be going in this merry-go-round when we know that God is going to meet the needs of my spouse, whether it's the Adam or the Eve. Talk about that list you put up there. You had put up a list of how God met all of Adam's needs, and then you connected it with Abraham.
And when you look at all of the needs that God met for Adam, God made him, God breathed the breath of life, God gave him trees for food, God gave him running water, God gave him a place to live, God gave him connection, God gave him meaningful work, God gave him freedom, boundaries, and stability. God gave him a suitable help and companionship in Eve. Okay, so when you're reading Genesis 2, now again, you have to put yourself in Adam's shoes in this regard. Adam becomes a living being, and he is, in some sense, they're all alone. Yes. He wakes up and he's there. Yes. And what you see progressing through that chapter is how God is meeting his needs. Now, we live in the 21st century, and I don't know how long. Some people think the earth is young, so it could be 6, 8, 10,000 years old. We don't know, but nevertheless, we live in the 21st century now, and we do not perceive as human beings that God has met all of our needs. Why? Because our mom and dad, or the people who had us, our parents, they came together and we were born, and so we didn't have anybody, quote unquote, breathe breath, the breath of life in us. And then our parents and the parents are the ones who cared for us, are the ones who gave us the food to eat, and they're the ones who bought the food and or grew the food. If we lived in more of an agricultural society, we have running water in our homes. So what I'm saying is, like, we don't necessarily think of God meeting all of those needs, but this is what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches that every good thing in our life has come from the hand, come from the Father who is in heaven. And so So this is part of where you have to okay, so who gave your parents the breath of life? Okay, who gave your parents the ability to work? Okay, so that money came in, and so while that money came as a result of your parents or somebody else working, who ultimately did it come from? Who gave your parents the ability to think, the ability, the energy to work? I mean, you have to, and this is part of theology. Mm-hmm. Theology is, if we believe the Bible, then the Bible teaches that God, He's the one who's given us everything we need for life, for godliness. And so therefore, when you look at every need and that's where I'm like, physiological. Well, who gives us air and water? Where does all that truly do come from? Comes from God. Mm. Where does the personal security and employment and resources and health and proper, where does it come from? All of those needs actually are met in the Creator. And so if we can understand that, then that is really the baseline to free us to actually give ourselves to the other.
Yes. So that was very clear because it helped us to see the negative and the positive. You were very vulnerable in this teaching and preaching. You talk about how Joni would comment on the need you want, she doesn't give you. Is there something that has evolved through your many years of preaching and teaching that you can now say God is really fulfilling? Because what Joni was telling you 20-some years ago, we don't see that today. But how has your preaching evolved? How do you affirm yourself? And how do you recognize what God has given you?
Yeah, I definitely don't affirm myself. I'm the biggest critic of myself. I'm actually, listening to my sermon, particularly on Saturday evening. I'll listen to it on the way back to the house and go, that's painful. Because again, I'm the biggest critic that I have. Now, how I've grown in my marriage is I don't go home and immediately the first thing I say to Joni is, hey, how was it? At the end of the day, here's what I know about Joni. She loves me.
Yes.
And here's what I know about the Lord. The Lord's already proud of me. The Lord has already affirmed me, not because of how great I am, but because of what Jesus through His death and resurrection has done and declares me to be. So that's where I am perfectly content in the Lord, that He loves me, He's for me, and all He's asking is, did you give me your best? And I think people know this. When I preach, I'm giving God my best. I'm not shortchanging God on me bringing energy, me bringing the conviction, me bringing kind of the declaration, me trying to also bring, when I say the creativity and bringing the craft of being able to take a very hard message and weave, moments of lightheartedness and heaviness and, being authentic. I'm bringing my absolute best. And really, that's all God wants of me. He doesn't want my perfection. He doesn't want my performance. He just wants me to sacrifice in giving Him my all. And that's what I do. And so that's where and because of that, I'm content. Yes. I'm satisfied. So, now I always love to hear, here's the thing. I love to hear feedback. I love to hear how God's using it, which is why, for the most part, when people's like, man, that really resonated with me, man, it really touched me, here's usually what I say: to God be the glory. Because if anything good came out of the preaching, that wasn't me, that was Him. Yes. And so that's part of where, if I know that good's coming out of me, then it's not really my good, and I'm doing air quotes if you're listening to this on podcast. It's not my good, it's His good in me. And so that's where, if I'm just a vessel of Him using me, yes, then I'm content. I don't need the attaboy. I don't need the attaboys, don't need the affirmation. I'm not saying don't give them to me. Yes. Again, that's affirming God's work in me. Yes. But that's how that's changed. And Joni and I, we went to the Nate Bargatze comedy show on Sunday evening, and we were in the car, and Joni she verbalized. She's like, you have significantly grown in that area. And by growing in that area, I've alleviated that pressure from her to feel the need to be God, to be the one that puffs me up and the one that I've actually alleviated that pressure where I've freed her from that responsibility.
Yes, I see how that is very good for marriage. If an individual, a pastor, or anyone listening to us, you know that God is the one that meets our needs, it transfers into our marriage so that I will know that in the marriage, I am going to trust God to meet my needs. I'm not looking to my spouse because personally, as you have even shared, you've really seen that God has met your needs, but He just gives us other people who will be telling us about. Yeah. So that was the first point.
I got another example, and I'll be because usually I don't know if teenagers necessarily listen to this podcast. It'd be great if they did, but I'll give you another one that married couples usually struggle with, and that's sex. So we'll talk about sex again.
Yes.
So we were talking about, this because, so we have 3 kids. Mm-hmm. So that means at 3 different points, Joni has been pregnant.
Yes.
So sometimes pregnant women don't feel like doing it.
Yes.
And so Joni, we were talking about this. She reminded me, you remember how you really gave me a hard time? Like, you need to be doing it more.
Yes.
And I'm like, I do. And she's like, and it's not because I don't want it. Like, yes. I would love it. Yeah. Like I'm ready. I'm ready. You just let me know. But I've not put that pressure on her.
Yes.
And to be honest, if I say that I need sex, yes, then what I've just done is I've elevated sex to the status of God,
yes, and
the status of an idol, that I need something in order to be satisfied and content as a man. And see, what I had to learn, and I mean this all my heart, and Joni, she affirmed this, I had to learn that I didn't need it. Now, yes, I wanted it and I love it. And so does my wife. But there are times in our marriage, and even Paul even talks about this in 1 Corinthians, is that sometimes give your body a break,
yes,
and seek the Lord.
Yes.
You don't need it.
Yes.
But then, then there are times where, hey, listen, be healthy sexually and give yourself to your spouse. So there's both and, but I had to get to the point I didn't need it. Mm-hmm. And I was content if I never had sex again.
Yeah.
Now that's huge. But here's what we're saying though, because I know that there are some people, they're called to be single. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so therefore a call to singleness is a call to celibacy. Yeah. So what are they saying? They're saying that, they don't need sex.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, we don't. Adam didn't need it. And so that's just another example. And so you have to decide what you think are your perceived needs. I say perceived needs because, again, sex might be your perceived need, but that's not your need. Okay, then, so number 1 cause of divorce is communication. Sure. Number 2 is finance.
And the third?
I don't know what the third is. You know the third?
Sex?
Maybe. I don't know. I guess we can chat GPT it real quick, but I just know communication and communication breakdown is number 1, finances is number 2. But I want you to think about the perceived needs.
Yes.
So, and this is something that you ought to think about too before you even get married if you're thinking. Because if you have this perceived need that you need a big house, a fancy car, again, you don't need those things. That's the pressure that the culture might put on you or that you put on yourself. And so I do know that there are times where couples fight about finances, but what are the perceived needs of those finances? Because I know the kind of culture that we live in, they might have the pressure, I want a fancier house, I want a fancier car, I want to go on nicer vacations, and we never have any margin, or whatever it may be. Is okay, you don't need those things. You might want those things, but you don't need them. And then when you think about just emotional or psychological needs, affirmation, security, stability, and encouragement. Okay, now those are, when you look at that list of Abraham Maslow's hierarchy, okay, those are there, but where do you get that from? And so this is where sometimes it's, now, all right, so now that I've preached this message.
Yes.
Okay. So ultimately, you get them from the Lord.
Yes.
You don't have to. You can free your spouse up if they're not meeting your needs there. And we'll get to this, but that last point that I made, of mirroring God and those two arrows, that's where that comes from. That's where your spouse, because you're mutually giving yourself to one another. You're mutually serving one another. You're mutually valuing one another. And so now again, so that's what I'm trying to get at, is that God meets those, so you can take the pressure off of you, so that your mate doesn't have to be your master, doesn't have to be your God. Okay, but if we mirror our master, if we mirror God in our marriage, guess what we're going to be doing? We're going to be affirming one another. We're going to be stabilizing one another. We're going to be pursuing one another. We're going to be connecting with one another. We're going to be intimate with one another. We're going to be sacrificially giving ourselves to one another. We're going to be mutually submitting ourselves to one another. And so, because you're just mirroring God, who's done all that for you. Yes. That's how that works.
Yes. I think this really centers as the word for this, your one word was center. This really centers on us to know that marriage doesn't meet your need, God does. So I want to move on to the second point you've made. Marriage was God's idea, not mine. So God meets a need. Your second point was God is the one who brought the idea. God joined us together. And this is where you gave us three outstanding pillars. Marriage, in God's mind, consists of the same conviction, consists of synergetic compatibilities, and then the third one, marriage is in God's mind, of similar commonalities. So you waxed a lot about this, because this is where you said, well, we tell you, that's us you were talking about. We always say you go back to Genesis. I like how you went back to Genesis and really used Adam and Eve to be able to show this, to show that they were two different people, but God brought them together. So talk about these three pillars that you talk about: conviction, compatibilities, and commonalities. And also, again, with those, you gave us great example from Scripture and you and Joni. Then I have a question that Matt has for both of you. On that.
Okay, so I mean, this goes back to, all right, and we'll carry this on to next week too, because next week's kind of big idea is around failing to read the instructions. So if somebody's going to create instructions about a product, well, they're the ones who have created that product and tell you how and to instruct you on how to use that product. Okay, so if marriage is not our idea and it's God's idea, well, then we ought to go to the creator of marriage and say, hey, what's your idea about marriage? Now, so here's what I want you to realize, though, that we're living in a culture where people are at least waking up to this notion is that they don't need to be married. So marriage, I don't know if you know this, but marriage is actually on the decline in the U.S. So in 1970, 76% of U.S. adults were married. By 2020, that number dropped to 49%. So 49% of adults in 2020 were married, whereas in 1970, 76%. So 3/4 of the American population were married in 1970. Now, about half the population. So marriage is trending downward. As of 2024, only 47% of households are headed up by married couples. Compared to nearly 79% in 1949. So if you're living in a household, so Americans, again, the typical American couple in the household, only 47% of them are married, compared to in 1949, almost 80% were married. So why the decline in marriages? Well, economic pressures, the rising cost of living, housing, childcare, and so they prioritize financial stability over career before marriage. So that's kind of where like they're not getting married. They're just living together, which is part of that, that cultural shift is that. So to help alleviate the financial pressures, they don't want to get married just yet, but they might live together. And then there's this cultural shift. Don't know if you Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn and others like Charlize Theron. She played in The Italian Job and a couple other movies. But Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn, they're two well-known, I would say, baby boomer actors. They've been together for 30, 40 years, never got married because we don't need to do that. Why do we need to do that? We love each other. We just going to. So that's where a growing sense that marriage is optional and it's not essential for fulfillment. Then you got this is interesting too. In 1970, the median age of first-time marriage was 23 years of age for men and 21 years of age for women. Wow. Now in 2022, the average age for a man going into his first marriage is 30 and a woman 28. So they're even waiting longer, to get married. And so what you have is marriage is really on the decline because they're like, why do we need it? Mm-hmm. Because and it's showing the secularism and the progressive ideology. And again, I'm not offended by that. At least they're owning their worldview. They're owning their faith framework, which is why it's so important that we as Christians understand our faith framework. And our faith framework will tell us that marriage is a sanctified institution. It has been set apart by the Creator. That the Creator Himself actually created the institution of marriage. So if He created it, we might want to go into His mind and see what He had in store for marriages. Okay, and so that's where those three pillars come, and that's conviction. So what do you believe? What are you passionate about? And I was very passionate about that point.
Yes, we saw that.
Because I see. Here's what we're seeing in the American church. We have actually seen a loss of conviction and passion for Jesus and the church over the last several decades. Okay, so for me, that's concerning for marriages in general, because if you have a waning or a decline in the passion for Jesus, for His church, that is not going to bode well for marriages. Yes. Because now, what's going to hold you together? What's the conviction holding you together, other than I love each other? Mm-hmm. That's concerning. That ought to be alarming. That's why, if you're single, the person that you ought to be passionate, head over heels, madly in love with Jesus and committed to His only bride, which is the church. And you ought to be looking for an individual just like that. Mm-hmm. Just like that. Okay? And if not, don't go further. Do not go further. Now, I was talking to somebody at lunch today, and this is interesting. All right, so in the Old Testament, it was assumed that you had the same conviction, which is the whole idea that Jews were not to intermarry outside. Yes. Okay, so when you look at Solomon, when he married all of those foreign women, he married them not out of conviction, but out of convenience. Yes. And the convenience was actually part of how the culture operated back then in different nations, giving their children into marriage, or kings marrying other women from other nations to create a peace treaty. So he married all these foreign women out of convenience, not out of conviction. And as a result, and you can read this in 1 Kings 11, those foreign women led his heart astray. Okay, so but when you look at the Old Testament, the whole idea of not intermarrying with other nations was all around conviction. They did not share the same faith. Therefore, they did not share the same worldview, did not share the same mission, did not share the same ethics, and did not share the same spiritual maturity of how they practice their faith. Yes. Okay, so in the New Testament, now this is where it changes. When I say changes just a little bit, is because now, yes, Christianity started out as a Jewish movement, but very quickly became a Gentile movement. So when you read in First Corinthians chapter 7, when you read where Paul is giving some instructions of couples who maybe they were unbelievers when they got married, but then but later on in their marriage, one of them came to know Jesus and the other one didn't. Okay, so now what do I do, right? Well, that's where Paul's going to say, stay in that marriage as long as the unbelieving spouse would have you. And then Peter's going to say, and then make sure that, hey, listen, that you are living faithful to Jesus so that maybe your spouse might see your good deeds, might see how you love Jesus and love them, and may come to faith in Christ. So I share that because in the 21st century, I know that when I'm speaking out in a group as our size, about 2,500, 3,000 people at a given time, 1,000 people online and almost 2,000 people in the service. I mean, so you got a lot of people that's listening, and so you might. So this is a common one right here that we have. So you had one, because you have to understand that, really prior to the 21st century, we had a lot of cultural Christians, particularly in the South, Florida, and really, I would even say the Northeast, maybe not as so much in the West, but even if they were, Catholic, or kind of Protestant, like Lutheran or stuff, like people came from some kind of church background, but they weren't. Their conviction wasn't like their heart beat for Jesus. It was just part of their life, and so they just wanted to make sure that like. If they were a cultural Christian, do you believe in God? Okay, yeah, where do you, not where do you go to church? It's kind of like, what are you? Well, you might be a Presbyterian, you might be a Methodist, you might be a Baptist, but you might not be that connected. But then, so you got those two people. There's really not a core conviction. Yes. It's just a cultural. Like, kind of a cult. I don't want to say even a cultural conviction, but maybe you can say it that way, that, that God was somewhere in their life. But it wasn't this like core, kind of passionate conviction about Jesus, right? But then they get married, and years down the road, one spouse, like, maybe they meet a friend and they start going to church, and then they're sold out. Well, their other spouse isn't sold out. Okay, well, and so that's kind of that 1 Corinthians type thing, and right. So, and then you might have two that got married. They were unbelievers, but came to faith later. Like, so in some sense, you might find a host of different kinds of situations out there. But this is part of where I'm really trying to stress God's mind. Amen. It's His mind, and so now, if you are married. And both of you are coming to church and passionate about Jesus. Yay! Praise God that you are of the same conviction. I talked to a couple, a couple of spouses this past weekend, where one came and said, "Man, that's my spouse. My spouse, kind of comes to church and but not really heavily involved, and feels like that I'm too passionate or too like, but again, like so." So they don't share the same conviction, and so that's where you're going to have to pray that the other spouse that God gets a hold of their heart where their heart beats for the same worldview, the same purpose, the same ethics, the same spiritual maturity, rather than God being a part of their life, God becomes their life. And then for singles and dating and divorcees, like, this is where, okay, yeah, all right, so if you're going to get married or you're looking to get married at some point, same conviction, same conviction, same conviction, you better beat that drum, that they got to share that same faith framework. Jesus is my center. Jesus determines how I see the world, how I see marriage. Jesus determines how I see my purpose in life. Not to fulfill, the American dream, but to fulfill His mission in the world. Like you got that. Like, that's paramount.
So I have a question.
Yeah, okay.
Since this is the podcast and extra, you will not probably speak this in the pulpit, but I know what we stand for. So we are talking about conviction. You made it very, very clear, a man and a woman, and you're all telling us about this conviction. We face this situation. Somebody comes up to me and said, this is my fiancé. He comes to church, he knows the Lord, but she doesn't or he doesn't. Where do we stand on that? Because you've made very clear in doctrine, in teaching, how do we respond to those two people? One is a believer, but backsliding probably, or not cultural, like you said, no core, and they have a non-believing girlfriend or boyfriend. Do we marry them? Is the question.
Well, the short answer is no. We don't marry. We don't. So here's the thing. This is what now I have pastors who would disagree with what I'm about to say. I'd marry two unbelievers before I married a believer and an unbeliever. Does that make sense?
Back again.
I would marry two unbelievers.
Yes.
Before I would marry a believer and an unbeliever.
Yes.
Why? They're equally yoked.
Yes.
They're equally yoked. And hey, if you want to get married, okay. I'm going to tell you what I believe about marriage, but listen, you're unequally yoked. And here's the thing, I'm not going to force you to come to know Jesus.
Yes.
Jesus never forces anybody to put their faith and trust in Him. Mm-hmm. Never. So I would marry two unbelievers before I married a believer and an unbeliever. But that's why we do premarital counseling.
Yes.
Now, here's the thing about cohabitation, and I think I mentioned this on the podcast last week.
You did.
But this is what I would say. Like, if you're two believers that love Jesus and you're cohabitating, let's get married sooner rather than later. Let's not wait. Let's go ahead and do this now. But if you're wanting to wait a year or 2 years, come on, let's stop playing house. So either do house or stop playing house.
Yes.
Like, that's what I would say. Okay. And that's what God would say. That's what God would say. Here's the thing. Let's just go ahead and do it. Let's go ahead and enter into that covenant, and that you are expressing your vows. And so I do have a point in the message where we really talk about vows and covenant and all that.
Yes.
So yes, but going back to your original question, yes, I would not marry an unbeliever and unbeliever and a believer. And this is where you haven't done, and this is where I got really frustrated with the church, and not necessarily Northland, but over the last several decades. So is my frustration coming out at this point. Mm-hmm. We have such a shallow church culture that we want to be liked more than we want to be standing on conviction about what the Bible says, and so we don't preach this hard truth. Oh, you love each other? Okay, I'll marry you. And okay, you believe in God? Oh okay. And it's one thing for somebody to believe in God. And this is where the whole faith framework plays out, is that there's beliefs and behaviors. Mm-hmm. So down on the bottom, ethics and spiritual maturity, that's behaviors. Yes. You got worldview and mission, that's your beliefs, okay? So even the devil and his demons believe in God. And so, you believe in God, you love each other, okay. And somebody says you were raised in church and you're Methodist, you might be Presbyterian, okay, no. You've got to do the deeper work. That's part of the whole idea of count. So here's the thing, too. And again, this is American culture versus a Middle Eastern culture. A Middle Eastern culture, and I think even maybe in African, is that we have arranged marriages in those cultures, okay? Yes, and there's even a higher status in that culture versus American culture about marriage, and that you're going to stick with that marriage because there's a shame-based culture to it.
Of your family.
Because the family brought you together, so let no man separate what the family brought together. Because it's almost very similar to what God brought together, let no man separate.
Yes.
So you got this high view of marriage in these cultures. It's arranged marriages, so it's not necessarily based upon love. It's actually based upon duty and obligation. And so you stay in those marriages, even if you're not happy. Okay. Well, in American life, it's kind of like, oh, we think it's a good idea. Let's go ahead and get married. But then you get into it and you find 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years. If a marriage, and this is, this was about 5 years ago. But most first-time marriages, if they're going to end in the first 7 years. Yes. Because they get into it and they're like, well, this is not what I signed up for. I didn't know he was like this. I didn't know she was like this. And it's kind of like, you didn't do the deep work.
Yes.
Like, do the deep work. And maybe that's the chant I need to start. Do the deep work. Do the deep work. And that's what premarital counseling does, is do the deep work so that you know that you're on the same conviction. Then you have synergistic compatibilities, and then you have similar commonalities.
Yes.
So the synergistic kind of compatibility, I didn't want to get too graphic. But
there were two opposites. You started to say those were two opposites, and they will things you like together.
So a man has a man part, and a woman has a woman part, and they fit together.
Yes,
they're different. They're two different things. Yes. But they're like two puzzle pieces that fit together. Yes, that's what I was trying to get at. Yeah. But I think that those are not only are they physical components that are synergistic components to enhance the whole. That's what I want you to think. And that's part of the reason why we don't believe in gay marriage, is that that's not how God designed marriage. Okay, but then when you even look at the physical parts of how they fit together in a synergistic compatible manner, that's also when you look at the makeup of a woman and the makeup of a man. There are many times that there are differences that really are opposite, but they actually attract. And so that's part of where you got to explore. Do those opposites actually work in a synergistic way? Yeah. Now, sometimes what you have to learn is how to use them in a synergistic way. Mm-hmm. Because if you want your spouse to act just like you, well, no, you don't need another you. The world already got enough of you. you need someone else to enhance you. You need someone else to refine you. You need someone else to balance you. And so that's part of where these synergistic compatibilities really do come in. So conflict style. This is a good one. So the opposite traits that could happen in a marriage. One confronts issues head on. The other prefers to step back and cool down before addressing conflict. This is how both of those can enhance the marriage. The direct spouse ensures issues don't linger. Mm-hmm. No, don't you run away. We're going to talk about all right, you go to your room, you sleep it off, but we're going to talk about this tomorrow. Yes. Okay, we're not going to let this go, right? Yes. And then the other one, the measured spouse helps maintain calm and prevents escalation. Okay, all right. Well, I'll talk, but hey, let's tone it down just a little bit. Yes. And so that's how you can enhance, because again, that's a personality. It's how you're wired. And so those opposites can actually attract and enhance the marriage. You got love language, spiritual gifting. So one might be strong in mercy and compassion. The other is strong in leadership and truth-telling. Mercy softens leadership with grace. Truth-telling keeps mercy anchored in biblical convictions. And so, again, and this actually goes to even what the Bible teaches, particularly Paul, about spiritual gifting in the body. Yeah. So you might have this gift, I might have this gift, but together we enhance the body. Yes. Well, that happens in marriage, is that you can't have, again, we are not God. We are not perfect beings. And I actually, here's the thing and I've said this on the podcast before, I really now have gotten to a point where even pre-sin, I don't know if perfection existed apart from God.
Wow.
And what I mean by perfection, that doesn't mean like, and what I mean by perfection is the question would have been, would Adam never have, stumbled over a stump?
Yeah.
Or would he have never like stumped his toe?
Yeah.
I don't, you know what I'm saying? And the reason and where I get that from is Adam, I do believe that he was derelict in his duty of guarding and keeping the garden. But that wasn't the sin.
Yeah.
So even then, he's embodying some kind of laziness where he's not he's not in this state of perfection, doing everything the way God wanted him to do it. Mm-hmm. And so again, I talked about what sin was back in the Genesis series, but all of that to say, so that's where I would say that we weren't necessarily perfect beings. There's only one perfect being, and that is God. And so when you look at Adam and Eve, there's synergistic compatibilities to actually enhance the unit, singular. Why? Because you have a man and a woman coming together to form one flesh, one marriage. And so the two, they have differences and opposites, but then they come together to synergistically enhance the whole. So that's what so that's what I want people to know about synergistic compatibilities, and that's going back to premarital counseling. And then maybe if you're married and you don't, and you're opposite in a lot of different ways, but you don't know how to work out those opposites, that's where counseling can really help. Or find a marriage mentor, in which we have those here. Mm-hmm. And so find out ways that you can synergistically take your opposites and actually enhance the whole.
So I have the question now. You've answered it, but Matt was looking for how have we done this in our marriage? All those three pillars. I like how you emphasize the same conviction. Jennifer and I came from complete different backgrounds. She had a Muslim background, but she went to a Christian school and trusted Jesus. I came from my churchy background until I got saved. So our foundation, our conviction was based on Christ.
Yeah.
So that is really what I would want to encourage everyone. If you don't have that, try to have that conviction, and we've been able to give that to our daughters and their spouses. But I like these synergistic compatibilities. We are so different. The word you've used here, enhance the unit, not the unit. We are so different. You talk about conflict. I can cause conflict. She can cause conflict. And for me, I will drag it on. She wants it head on. Deal with it. So it's because of the unit. And our compatibilities have also helped in a reason. Most people won't know this. But my wife loves hospitality. It's not quite mine. But we can host people all the time because she wants it. And because we are compatible in that, I'll just join with her and say, let's do it, because it enhances the unit. And different things we do in marriage.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that's why these three pillars are very important for us to be able to know it was God's idea.
Yeah.
It was not man's idea.
Yeah, and here's what the last one is similar commonalities. I would actually, so that's the third pillar.
Yes.
So you could actually even put that lower on, in some sense, lower in weight versus the same conviction and synergistic compatibilities, because you need the synergy to enhance.
Yes.
But what I would actually say is that most marriages today, they actually get married because of similar commonalities. But here's the thing about those similar commonalities.
Yes.
Is that you could actually fall out, you could actually fall out of commonalities.
Yes.
Especially, all right, so think about what you can do when you're single. All right, so, so guys like to golf. Maybe women like to,
Can we say shop?
Shop. I mean, I don't want to, pigeonhole women. Like, I like to shop too. So maybe, but, so you probably have some, interest. And then what you did them together, and so maybe you went out to eat, maybe you like the same movies, yes. Maybe you were heading in kind of the same career path or close to that, or you had the same kind of what you wanted in life type thing. But then as life, if as life evolves, you might not have those commonalities. Those likes and dislikes might change, just like your taste buds.
Yes.
Your taste buds might change.
They do.
And then when you wake up, 5, 10, 15 years, from when you got married, you're like, well, we don't have anything in common anymore. Because you have evolved as a person, which is part of the reason why marriage, it takes so much work. But you got to have the same conviction. You've got to understand your differences and how they work together versus work against one another. Yes. And then you've got to actually, in that current season, what are the commonalities that we actually share, that we do together? Because that's actually where, that's where, connection and intimacy and doing life really happens with one another, is those commonalities. So all that saying, like when Joni and I, we've been married 22 years. We have a 19, 17, about to be 14-year-old. And so we love them, and that is a commonality that we have. But it is what I just said, a commonality. So we're going to be at the football games because that is a commonality. We're going to be watching Ellie cheer at those football games. We're going to support our kids. We're going to try to hang out with our kids as much as they really want us to hang out. But then we've got to make sure that we carve out time for our commonalities. Yes. So we like the parks. Yes. We take date nights to the parks. We like going out to eat. We love going to shows like the Nate Bargatze scene. It was just us, where we got to hold each other's hand, go into, like it was just us. So find those commonalities, because again, what you had as a commonality or commonalities 15 years ago when you got married, they actually might change. And maybe one of you, an interest that you have might be an interest that your spouse picks up. So maybe you really do love golf. And then maybe your spouse learns that, man, I love golf too. And so now you've got an interest that you can actually do together. But you actually need all three for, for that, like when I say that marriage to come together and be solidified the way God envisioned it in his mind at the very beginning. Yes. That's why I love what Adam says, bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called a woman. So she's not me, but she's like me. Yes. She's like me. She got a lot of similarities like me. But I love that. So he's really celebrating the similar commonalities, and even the differences, because he says woman, but bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh, woman. And so that's why those three pillars are so, I'm talking about, like, they're so foundational for Christian marriage. Now, you could actually add those principles, you could use those principles to any marriage, which is why I would marry an unbeliever. Yes. Two unbelievers. Okay, you got the same conviction. Hey, but let's talk through the synergistic compatibilities. And what are your, because I would drill it in with them. Yeah. What's your, now let me just tell you, if one of you ever becomes this, and whenever, listen, you're going to have some problems. You're going to have some problems, But when I do premarital counseling, I literally say, this is why this saves you money. Not that I charge for premarital counseling, but I can't do as many premarital counselings as I used to. But this is what I usually tell them first. You've got to have an unchanging center.
Thank you for those pillars that you have really cleared. I think, again, we'll come back for us as a church, that people got to see, if we keep marriage as God's idea, and that marriage is not about meeting my needs, it's easy to go to the third point you made, which I want us, you gave that clearly in the scriptures, because it glorifies God. It really shows kingdom and the nature of God, that marriage is a mirror to mirror God. Man, that was loaded. I know as you walked us through it, there were a couple of things I personally started to see, because you started first by talking about God's view of marriage. God has a high view of marriage, saying we destroy our marriage, but God wants us to stay together. Yeah. So talk to us about, how is marriage a mirror and to mirror God? with those points you made? God's view.
So this was interesting. The reason why the reason why I went to Matthew 19 as kind of the launching point is because I didn't want, because I wanted to show how Jesus goes back to Genesis.
You did that.
But I started out with Matthew, so I didn't say turn your Bibles to Genesis.
Yes.
But marriage as a mirror to mirror God, and I showed. So what Jesus says, what God joined together, let no man separate. Anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. Now, let me deal with that on the podcast, because now again, at some point I'll preach on that passage and get more in depth into that. But there are actually 4 views, Christian views, when it comes to this particular passage. So again, these are all Christian views, and that's where I'm saying you're not going to solve them. I wasn't going to solve them this past weekend. Okay, so one is that Jesus actually teaches no divorce and no remarriage. Okay. Now, because here's what he says: except for sexual immorality, anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality marries another commits adultery. Okay, so in this case, if this is the case, no divorce and no remarriage, then you would read Matthew 19 as a what they would call a betrothal context. So that's an engagement, betrothal and engagement. So an example of this, and you see this early on in Matthew, is that Mary and Joseph were considered married in the betrothal period. But Joseph thinks during that time, because Mary came up and said, I'm pregnant, and he's like, well, I don't believe it. I don't believe the Holy Spirit came up on you. Who else came upon you? So when the Bible says that he was going to put her away secretly, it was like a divorce. But before the actual consummation, before they actually were fully consummated in their marriage. And so that's where, so the no divorce and no remarriage would be like, if you've gone through with the marriage, then no divorce and no remarriage. Now, if you're, and again, I don't think anybody in this position would say, hey, if you have domestic abuse, verbal, physical, abuse, you need to stay in that marriage. I don't think anybody in that camp would say that. But what they're trying to do is say, here's what the Bible teaches: no divorce, like no remarriage, like you stay in that marriage. Why? Because they would say that it's mirroring God. Then, number 2 would be divorce permitted, but no remarriage. Okay, so here's the exception clause. So anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality, that there's been something to break the covenant. So a good example of this would be in the Old Testament, where in Exodus 19, you have covenant language. So a covenant was an official relationship by 2 parties that they entered into a covenant. And so God entered into a covenant with Israel, but it was a conditional covenant. If you obey my voice, then you will be my treasured possession. You will be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So if you obey me, this will happen. If you obey me, you'll live long life in the land. Okay. Well, they didn't. So they broke covenant because here's what the Old Testament teaches, is that they were unfaithful. They had committed adultery against God. And so there was a dissolving of the covenant. But what did God promise? God promised a restoration. God actually promised to restore and to reconcile what had been broken. Okay, but this one is divorce is permitted, but no remarriage. Is that, hey, listen, like and Paul would say something like this in 1 Corinthians 7: is go ahead and separate, go ahead and divorce, but pray for restoration, pray for reconciliation. So that's the divorce but celibate view. Okay, so that's the second view. Then, divorce allowed for biblical grounds and remarriage allowed. So that's number 3. Divorce is allowed for biblical grounds. And what would be those biblical grounds? Well, be this biblical grounds of sexual immorality. Other, biblical grounds would be abuse, any kind of domestic, physical, emotional abuse. Again, God, I believe with all of my heart, is not expecting you to undergo and submit to an abusive, hostile situation, okay? And so if you are, then you need to let us know, let the authorities know that if you're in that situation, okay? But that would be a biblical grounds for that. Here's what a biblical ground wouldn't be. Well, she never have sex with me. Mm-hmm. Like that actually wouldn't be a biblical grounds. I'm not happy. Mm-hmm. She's always nagging. Mm-hmm. He's lazy. I'm not happy. Like that. Those really aren't biblical grounds. I'm just being as honest, flat honest as I possibly can. Those aren't biblical grounds. Okay, but for where there is biblical grounds, then this view would say remarriage is allowed. Yes. Okay, but here, this is what we're going to look at in a few weeks. Is that okay? You get remarried again. Make sure you don't bring baggage into that relationship. Okay, so 2 wrongs don't make a right. All right, so that's all I would say there. And then the fourth is divorce and remarriage permitted in broader circumstances. And so this is more of the high grace, kind of compassionate view, is that hey, we live in a sinful world. Divorce and remarriage just kind of permitted in broader circumstances, and God's merciful, and again, that's the biblical view that people have. All 4 of them are they're held by people who love Jesus and who have done really some deep work in the Bible. So somebody might say, well, Pastor Josh, where are you?
I want to hear that.
Okay, so this is going to be a really unique answer. Yeah. From a theological perspective, like a straight up theological perspective of how I understand marriage and what marriage is supposed to be, I'm kind of at that no divorce, no remarriage. I'm very strict. From a straight up, okay, pastorally, I'm actually number 3. Divorce, I do believe is allowed. I mean, even Jesus says, hey, Moses gave you certificate of divorces because of the hardness of your heart. I do believe that there are times in a biblical grounds case that too much water has been, has been under the bridge for there to be repair. And I'm not, I'm just telling you, and the reason why I'm telling you this is because what you're going to hear in this series is what the Bible teaches about marriage. It's a very, very high view. Mm-hmm. I actually think that it would be a strict view. Mm-hmm. However, I do believe that we live in a fallen world, and even Christians, we are fallen, we are broken, and we sin. There is infidelity and there is unfaithfulness at times with our sin that can break covenant. But here's what I actually believe, though. And again, while I would hold to number 3, divorce allowed for biblical, grounds, and remarriage allowed, here's what I do believe, though. I even believe in the cases where there's biblical grounds of divorce, that there are times and there are situations, then there are couples that can apply the gospel. And can apply when I say the grace, and when I say the strict grace, I know that's a paradox, but the strict grace of the gospel, of how the gospel reconciles what has been broken. Yes. The gospel repairs what is broken. The gospel restores what has been fractured. So when you repair the strict grace of the gospel, I actually think that where biblical grounds could be inserted, grace could be inserted even more, and that there could be something beautiful that is worked out. I believe that with all of my heart, but that's at least my pastoral, kind of position.
Pastor Josh, we're going to talk about the last one, but for those of you who are listening, Pastor Josh will not remember this, But what he just explained in the interview for him to come and be a pastor, it was all on Zoom. You won't remember this, but he really gave us these 4 points without diving deep like you just did. So that's about 4 years ago. So biblically, you are very solid. Do you remember that, talking about that?
I actually don't remember that.
Who would listen?
Did they ask me about marriage? What I believed about marriage?
These 3 points,
Yeah.
and then you went on, but you never deep dive. So today we've really got it here on this podcast.
Yeah.
So tell us and talk with us about every marriage has choices, options. Whether a flourishing can happen, frustration happens, fracturing happens. So that was the third point. The first point was marriage doesn't meet your needs, it's God does. Marriage is God's idea, not mine, but marriage as a mirror to God, but he has options.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that. What were those options for ourselves and our spouses, each other?
Joni and I, for years now, we have told other, couples that, if you really do want to have a flourishing marriage, the two individuals have to die to one another. They have to die to their self, so that they could give their self to one another. And that's the whole idea of God meets my needs, not marriage, not my mate. Because if God's already met my needs, then that actually frees me up to actually serve someone else. Because I got everything I need. And so if other people want to give me affirmation, all that, then that's just cherry on the top, and it's awesome. So the same thing in a marriage is that if you want to flourish, both of you got to die to yourself so that you both can live to God and to one another. And then the second option that you have is that, okay, maybe one spouse sacrifices, they're selfless, and they sacrificially give themselves, and they're always serving the other, but the other one's always receiving and taking. And they, in some sense, take for granted what the other one's doing. At some point, frustration will set in.
Yes.
And somebody came up and said that's what had happened to them.
Wow.
Is that, one felt like I just kept on, and I was giving. I felt like I was giving, and I felt like they were doing nothing, and they were just being lazy. They weren't working on themselves, and you just got to a point where I was just frustrated, and we filed for a divorce. And so again, that's where if frustration happens long enough, then it can actually lead to fracturing. Where I'm tired of giving myself.
Yes.
But here's so let me give you, I know this is strict. This is where I told you about the strict grace and the strictness of marriage. Okay, so if your spouse is not doing anything from a biblical grounds for divorce, and you are the one, in some sense, living out the gospel, that you're giving, you're sacrificing, you're the one that's, you feel like, and your spouse is a lazy bum that just takes you for granted. Okay, here's what I want you just to keep in mind. There's a lot of times that's the way Jesus looks at us.
Amen.
And so I get where the frustration is. I get it. Oh, believe me, I get it. But and this is where I'm saying, don't let that frustration that you have, bring it under the gospel. Let Jesus breathe life into you, okay? Because if you let that frustration fester, it will lead to fracturing. Yes. But this is part of where I'm saying, if you speak the gospel in your life, and sure, you might be doing all the heavy lifting, and your spouse not doing anything. But if you apply the gospel in that situation, then you don't have to find yourself frustrated. You can find yourself at least functioning, because you know that God, you're doing everything. You are actually mirroring God in seasons and situations where his children are not pulling their weight. And that's what I would tell you there. So with that, Gus, any last? Okay.
Well, I think this is week 2. We have about 8 more weeks. So you really don't awaken love. And this week we've talked about the anchor, the center of our marriage. So big idea for next week.
Fail to read the instructions.
We can't wait to hear that. So
fail to read the instructions.
And thank you for the solid biblical teaching and preaching unmarried. We will not lose our families by the grace of God.
Well, appreciate that, Pastor Gus. Well, thank you again, Northland family and friends, for tuning in to another episode of Extra Takes. Blessings.
Thanks for listening to Extra Takes. Be sure to follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so you won't miss a single episode.